right, welcome to the stage, Michael Carroll from LNS Research.
So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Lucian. And let's go ahead and let's just dive right into it. Today, we're going to start talking about closing the skills gap before it closes your factory. And I think we've been living that. And so let's get into this. With us today, we have Andrew Sherman, right, from Arch Systems, and Andrew, you're the CEO. And you've been living this for a while. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself briefly and just give us a brief introduction.
Yeah, good to be here, Michael. So yeah, I've been leading Arch Systems for about 10 years. Before that, I was an engineer building equipment, mainly semiconductor equipment. And our company combines expertise with understanding how equipment and factories actually run with the latest AI techniques to make it work for frontline workers and management teams.
All right. Next, we have Yen Pengel from Ingersoll Rand. Tell us about you, Yen.
Thanks for having me here. Yeah, my name is Yen Pengel. I'm a product leader of digital solutions for Ingersoll Rand, mainly involved in taking equipment data all the way from IoT to our internal stakeholders and distributors, partners, and customers, trying to help them run the equipment more efficiently and be able to detect any issues before they happen and be able to help our customers reduce unplanned downtime. And then also providing all kinds of other information about our equipment, including giving them guidelines for how to fix issues, etc. Before that, I've been working in industrial automation for many years, both from Honeywell and Rockwell Automation. And I'm also a board member of Industry 4.0 Club, where we help small and medium-sized manufacturers better get engaged in Industry 4.0.
Fantastic. And Patrick, you're last. So Patrick from Axiom.
Yes, sir. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for inviting me to participate. My name is Patrick Gaughan. I am a partner at Axiom Manufacturing Systems here in Ohio. We are a hybrid consulting business where we do systems integration and consulting on Industry 4.0 for manufacturing of all sizes. I think my 34 years in engineering in a variety of different forms at a large Fortune 100 company made me recognize that there's a lot of value in the large organizations, and that with experience in lean manufacturing, supply chain, quality systems, there's a lot of value that somebody with that many years can have, in their toolbox, if you will. And our intention was to be able to deploy that with all of these sort of small to mid-size manufacturers who don't necessarily have the luxury of having broad benches like we had in the big companies. And so we actively seek to be able to help people to navigate that journey, which can be a bit overwhelming for some of the smaller organizations. Having said that, we find ourselves continuously being pulled into the large manufacturing operations because they still have some of the exact same problems that they've always had. So that's us in a nutshell.
Perfect. So I want to make sure we thank Andrew and Arch Systems for being our sponsor today. And Andrew, thank you very much.
Of course.
All right. So today what I want to do is I kind of want to set our background. It's kind of going to be a little bit of free form. We'll feed off each other. So in this landscape, we're all feeling this pain. So since 1975, right, the amount of people with deep tenure that work in our facilities has decreased by 50%. During that same time, the amount of things these people have to look at in our facilities, right, because we've done marginal contribution analysis and trying to add value to our facilities has went up by 50%. So fewer people with deep experience, 50% more things for them to look at. And at the same time, because we've done digital emulation, we've added ERPs, MESs, right? Lots of technology layered on top of all these things. We've gave them 8 times more things to think about and look at, right? And the question is it working, right? And so that's the nutshell. 8 times more things to look at. You have less people with less deep experience to keep it running, and more things. So much more complexity. So how do we solve for that? we're probably not going to make them way more experienced. Demographics are destiny. So I'm going to start with Andrew because I know you're right in the thick of this.
Yeah, it's kind of an intractable problem, as you pointed out. And I think what I see happening in plants, I spend almost half my time on the road in factories in the US a lot, Mexico, Asia as well, around the world. And you'll see a dwindling number of experts doing fantastic work, but having to pick which problems they solve. And there's just more and more problems that they don't have time for. And so don't get done at all, or get done by those people without the experience. And worse yet, maybe there's a form somewhere like, is this a false call defect, or what's the reason for this downtime or whatever? And they're just ignoring it entirely, or just punching the first option just to get the form done with, right? And so that's the reality of the factories. It's like we're actually degrading in some ways the quality of performance because there's simply no way to meet that challenge. And then, of course, there are people who really want jobs. Like, I feel like whenever I jump in an Uber car, I'm like, you thought about going into manufacturing? Like, what, there's work, but that barrier to get into the first place and really enjoy the job. I meet just as many people that left a factory because they felt like they couldn't get any tutoring. They weren't set up to succeed. It was frustrating and they left again. And that, you didn't mention that part, but that's the changeover that's happening, the attrition of people, because they're not enjoying the work and they're feeling like that barrier to complexity is too high. So they just leave again.
So that's an interesting presumption, right? They're leaving. And so how much of it is, and so Patrick, we'll switch to you, and then we'll go to Yen. So the question is, how much of our organizations are built around thinking about employees and these folks as replaceable versus renewable?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think for the longest time, going back generations, people were easily replaceable, right? People could be swapped out back and forth, and it really didn't make a whole lot of difference, presumably, on the part of the management teams to be able to do that. And so we didn't really invest a lot in the renewable portion of this, and how do we start to be able to help people to redefine who they are, what they do, and how do they achieve success. And if you think about, in particular, the frontline folks, right? They want to be able to produce. They're very driven. That's kind of what motivates those folks. They want to have minimal chaos. They want to be able to be participative in the business, right? So they want to be able to collaborate, and they want to get paid, right? And oftentimes all of this technical debt that you were describing, Michael, gets in the way and impedes their ability to achieve most of those things. And I think the fatal flaw is that a lot of times the management layer doesn't recognize that last piece, is that they could be institutional collaborators to help solve those problems. Instead, these innovations that Andrew was talking about that we bring forward in the form of ERP and other digital systems are pushed down to that layer of the organization without all of the forework and forethought about how do you do that well with them in mind. We don't collaborate with them. And as a result, they get very frustrated. They can't do what they want to be able to do. They know the company's not making money because we haven't enabled their success, and therefore they start to withdraw. And so I think that renewable piece is enabling them to participate in a way where they start to be a little bit more like us engineers, and we start to put ourselves into their shoes and recognize what it is that they're doing. And I think that's where that mated success is going to start to take place.
So Yen, how from an Ingersoll Rand perspective, when you think about moving this transactional load, which is what Patrick's talking about, right? That the frontline employees bearing the burden of picking up this transactional, right, interface between disparate systems and moving that to the front line. How are you thinking about how do you solve that?
Yeah, so my perspective, and I'd like to add to Patrick's a little bit after that, but my perspective is a little bit different because I'm in the OEM space, right? So we provide equipment to manufacturers. And so what we're seeing, and I was looking at some PowerPoints a little while ago, and we started this IoT journey probably like 10 years ago, and we were talking about the skills gap already then, right? That we could see that it's happening to our customers, that they're technicians that's been there 20 years, 25 years. That's going away, right? Where you would every 10 years get a new person in, and they would be trained by other technicians in the plant, and they would gradually become more and more efficient. that's not happening right now. We have people that are, you have a 40 to 50% turnover, and the average, tenure is like 2 to 3 years for Gen Z and millennials, right? There's no time to do that kind of training and build up. And so what we were thinking about is two parts. One is that we are providing a service organization that can come in and kind of augment the local technician with expertise. And that's for some part of our market. And then the other market is the smaller manufacturers that are doing the work themselves. We are providing now information ahead of time, like, for example, hey, in 1 to 2 weeks, your machine's going to be down if you don't change the filter now, right? Or things like that. So we can preempt some of these things and help these manufacturers stay running and not necessarily have a not catastrophic, but have a breakdown that is not optimal and not suddenly somebody has to figure out what to do about it. That's definitely one part of it that we saw that 10 years ago from our perspective, and we've now over the last 7 years with our new platform build up that entire infrastructure, so that our internal technicians, they sometimes get on site before the customer even realize they have an issue. And then we have other customers that are getting notified ahead of time, both when the machine is down and also when we can see through our IoT machine learning that we've seen this happening before. There's a trend based on this particular type of machine, and we can see that within 2 weeks or a month, you're looking at an issue where you have to either do something very simple, or it could be a little bit more critical. And so we are looking at what we call insights that we are providing to our end customers as well, to make sure that they can kind of plan for things ahead of time, either schedule a service technician to come in and actually do the service, or do whatever maintenance that they have to do themselves. And we find that that's very critical right now. We see that all over the place, that our customers are losing those key critical personnel that's been there for years. I mean, we hear it all the time, that there are people in the plant that can stand on the opposite side of the equipment. They can hear when things are going wrong. They just hear, hey, something is happening with that machine. It doesn't sound right. Those people are going away, right? And so that's what we're trying to augment with AI, machine learning as well, and provide that information to our customers.
So, Andrew, as you guys start to think about where adding transactional load to the front line in a way that Patrick talked about is akin to asking that frontline employee to text and drive, right? Mm-hmm. while they're trying to do their work. How do you use technology to enable a less skilled is probably not the right word, a less knowledgeable, right, employee, to gain their adaptive capacity back, so they can actually think about things in a way that allows them to predict what may or may not happen, as in when Yin talks about that doesn't sound right, so that they're not as distracted and they ignore that problem that they would otherwise have known was coming. How do you use technology to set people up for success?
Yeah, so as you say, there are where are there a lot of people? There's not less skilled, but less trained, right? Less experienced people at the front line. And then Jan, what I think you said is, your company's pivoting to like an as a service model. So you've got a smaller number of highly trained people. And then one technology that's effective is, you talked about predictive maintenance. If you know in advance, this is how it's going to break, you can get that really well-trained person to go over to that plant, who's not standing at the line every day 24/7, but can get there in time with the right tools and solve it. And that's one part of the solution. And then there's the rest of the time where there's all the other things that go wrong in the factory, where the right trained person isn't there, and you are going to have to be predictive in other ways, or maybe reactive still. There's a lot of reacting to what's going on, and then needing, as you said, Michael, like how do you get those people better capable? That's where I think generative AI, the new agentic AI, is really powerful, because it can pair with people with less experience and augment their experience. Now, Chat GPT out of the box is not that. You can chat with it all day long and just get it general answers. But if you combine the specific SOPs and work instructions, the documentations of the knowledge, one use case, Michael, that I think a lot of people are realizing is that equipment have pretty structured error codes, for example. Like there's a lot of things that are known to go wrong. Or when you talk about tests, there's structured defect codes. And there already exists high quality equipment that will determine this is the defect or this is the error. And if you knew what you're doing, you could, oh, maybe there's even 5 error codes. That's a little complicated. But you know what? If you've done it before and you read the book, this is what that means. Here's what you do. Generative AI can take over that thinking and be like the expert behind your shoulder, saying, yeah, I read the book already for you. I translated it maybe if it's not in the language that you know. And here's what you need to do. We like to call those guided actions, because now the person is not chatting with ChatGPT, wasting their time. Like you said, texting while driving. It's more like, I mean, you do have the Google Maps while driving, but you don't chat with it and it just says, turn left. And after that, turn right. That's what you need.
So let's go there, because Rashid asked an interesting question and we may want to dive into, because he asked this question about what barriers prevent companies from implementing continuous on-the-job training at scale, right? And so if you think about that for a second, right, we talked about transactional work being loaded onto the front line, right, where work is actually being done. And if you think about, you talked about Google Maps or Waze. What does Waze actually do for you? It gives your adaptive capacity back, especially if you're in the moment, in traffic. You don't have to absorb your cognitive load to do navigational calculus, right? And so you can be aware of your surroundings to do other things. So if we were to answer that question, how would we each answer that question? So Patrick, give us what you think we can go do.
So yeah, let me kind of build off of what Andrew was talking about. So we often at Axiom will talk about 5S of information flow. And for those of you in the manufacturing space, 5S means this is what I put where, and it's always there. So I always know it's there. But we oftentimes neglect to be able to think about the fact that that applies as much, if not more so, to data than it does everything else, right? It's what I need, where I need it, when I need it, in the form that I need it. Right. So in Andrew's example, when you start to talk about Waze, it has only the streets on it that you're driving on and where you need to make your next turn to keep it very, very clear. Right. When it comes to manufacturing operators, these are folks, oftentimes they're working with gloves on their hands. It's a messy, dirty kind of job. Right. And they've got to be able to do a lot of transactions. And while well-intended, a lot of folks on, say, the high-level system side say, well, I want to be able to track all of my transactions for everything that moves everywhere all the time, because that sounds good, right? And so we do all this barcode transactional work, and it sounds great, and it gives you massive data sets so that you can always track everything, only to find out that mistakes are made and it starts to become convoluted and unwieldy at some point, right? And so if we change our paradigm about that very scenario and say, you know what, maybe it's not the best thing that I record hundreds of millions of transactions for this business using a barcode scanner that I have to log into every time. And I start to use technology a little differently. Maybe with an AI component, potentially, but certainly with spoken word, right? So that while my hands are working, I'm doing things, I can start to record information and manage transactions. At the same time, I can leverage RFID to be able to say, well, the system's actually going to do the work. I don't have to have the people do it. But with each one of those solutions, you start to bring in different technical challenges. Case in point, when it comes to RFID, managing across a broad space with RFID tags sounds fantastic until you have to say, well, I'm actually going to transfer some material into a tank or batch or whatever, and I'm doing consumption. And when I'm reading the tags to be able to pull it in and say, well, I can pull any one of the tags that happen to be in the room at that time to make that addition to that batch, what good are my records, right? So it hasn't worked. So the combination of saying I'm going to do near field communication along with some broadband starts to make a lot of sense. So we have the ability to leverage technical solutions, but you have to be very intentional to be able to do that. So wanting to keep people's hands clean and free, high value. Doing it poorly only adds to that technical debt that you've talked about, and somebody's got to go back and clean up all the messy stuff behind it. And sometimes, in some cases, people just give up and say, I just made a complexity mess and I've got to start over. That's what you want to avoid.
Wonderful answer. Yen?
Yeah, I would even take it a little bit step further, probably. Through Industry 4.0 Club, we've had several conversations with companies that are looking at generative AI, or have been looking for a while, on looking at what can they do to improve the process and the learning in a factory. And on a manufacturing plant, the best learning is doing, right? And so there are a couple of companies that have been trying to do a low technology, but with back-end high technology, of course. But the idea is that you can go take a experienced person, they can do a process, they can document a process through their phone, and though that video with their voiceover while they're doing it goes through a generative AI, and it goes through and actually generate not their voice and what they're saying, but an SOP-like process with augmented reality, so that any person could actually try to do themselves, and this system will guide them through the process of doing that. And that's a tool that I've seen. There's a couple of vendors out there that's doing something. Some of them started out with a goggle thing and found out that doesn't work. But you got to go low technology, even with either with an iPad or a phone or something that is simple enough to handle. And that's definitely something that I can see it can be valuable. And I don't know if you've seen a couple of ads out there. I've seen now that there are offerings where you can, with an AI, set up a question and answer process with your parent, for example, and they would go through a process, and then suddenly a book comes out of it that tells their story. Mm-hmm. That's another technology that I know a couple is looking at to do for like the experienced person that they know is going to retire within the next 5 years. Have a system that actually goes through and try to help get with question and answers and a conversation, like an AI conversation, get them to document in an easy, approachable way of what they're actually doing, what their knowledge is, and that I haven't looked into what the results of those are and how far they are, but that's another way to get that information down in a way, because I know if somebody's going to retire, the last thing they want is to sit down for hours and hours and start documenting what they're doing. But if it comes in a more natural way, it makes probably more sense. So there are definitely technology out there, especially with the AI stuff, that's not going to replace people, but it's going to be a tool that can enable people much better. And especially right now, where with this turnover scenario, we got to get these younger people, first of all, interested in manufacturing, happy about doing it, having the tools that they need in the daily process of what they're doing, so that they don't, like Andrew saying, they leave very quickly, right? And then at the same time, give them the tools to get better and better at what they're doing. So if they've done it 3 times, they can do it without the help, right? Then that's just a natural way of doing it. We tried it ourselves in Ingersoll Rand with the goggle thing initially. It was like 7 years ago. But we could see that we could reduce the time of doing something from a paper document that would take them 2.5 hours. They could do it now in 1 hour, and then later on in a half an hour, right? And then have these other tools, they could do it much easier and much faster. So that, I think there's ample opportunity for technology to help get the new workforce up to speed and doing what they're supposed to do.
Perfect.
I'd like to take a page from Jens' playbook for just a second, because I love that analogy that you just brought up in the emerging technology. One of the ones that we're very favored on is actually leveraging digital imaging to create those digital work instructions, where, and this didn't exist if you want to go back 10 years prior to AI, you couldn't do that. And now there's companies out there doing absolutely fabulous work. Hang some cameras up, and if you can identify what right looks like before those people actually leave, you can have a video of what that looks like, and it will turn that into an automated transcript with digital snippets along with it, so that you can at least preserve what that looks like. And there are companies out there that are doing absolutely fabulous work in that space, and we think that's going to be very emergent.
Wonderful. So we got a question from Laura. Andrew, I'm going to turn to you, because the question is about agentic, and I wondered how long it would take to get agentic in a question. And so we're going to segue, and the way we're going to segue into this agentic is we're going to talk about kind of from first generation to second generation AI. First generation is largely just data science centric. Second generation is full agentic, right? And so it's this notion that if you think about the frontline employee and his need to bring his own logic in the navigation of menus, right? And that's really the question is how long and how much effort is it going to take? And is the conversational user experience, is that really the future and really where we need to go in order to get to the agentic future, and then maybe lean in to what agentic begins to look like as a transition to the shop floor?
Yeah, we could take that in a lot of different ways, right? And
Yeah.
I like, throughout this whole conversation, I really like the Google Maps or the Waze analogy that we didn't talk about this in advance, Michael, but it's one of my favorite analogies for generative AI, actually, because it's not a chatbot. It's just like helps give you instructions. And like, I'm an expert at driving, like I know how to get to my grocery store, but I still turn it on because I can't see the traffic pattern in front of me. And so this is giving me data I don't have, even though I'm an expert. And people that aren't an expert don't even know how to get to the store. So everybody wants the guidance that's using the data. And Patrick, you guys were talking about how, you can do a specific example, like here's how to get to the grocery store, record it, and now everybody knows how. But then the big idea is, could we have AI do everything, even, or half of all the things? Like, what are all the routes and how do you map all those? And people get lost in the complexity of unified namespace is the best word for it, like tag absolutely everything, define all the roads. So I guess, Michael, like if you say a specific use case, like the agentic is like a robotic arm for the mind. So like, we're actually, like, before we had a robotic arm because like we're not going to lift everything. We're going to let a robot lift stuff. And now we're going to let AI think for us. Like, it's literally going to do the thinking for us. And that's kind of new and scary, but it's extremely powerful. And just like in a factory today, there's lots of humans doing stuff with their arms. Like, our arms are not useless. They're really important, but we want robot arms to do as many arm things as possible. It's the same. We want agentic AI to do as many brain things as possible, and it should do it automatically. That's the difference between agentic and a chatbot. It's like, not just chat to it, like do the whole thing if you can. Right. So just examples are really helpful. So one of my favorite examples is downtime labeling, because it's a reasonably standard thing that almost all factories have to do. You don't manage to predict all your downtimes, so you have downtimes. And almost everybody likes to label them as the 4M plus E. Man, method, machine, materials, environment, and they've got some subcodes. And it's a really boring process, and it takes a reasonable amount of expertise, because you got to look at a lot of data and go, oh, was a machine code this error code, or was a material, which material was out? And you got to look through a bunch of stuff and you got to label it. It's one of those top processes that just gets ignored, or people mash the button because they don't have time to think about it. And so that is a great candidate to let AI think for you. You could have a chatbot. You can imagine the person could say, tell me all the data that you see. Is it man? Is it method? Oh, you think it's method. Tell me more. Oh, They could have a whole conversation, and then they could press the button. No, just let the agent look through all the data, consider all the reasons, pick the reason. And then, from a feedback process, if later, when you see how the line was repaired, they repaired it in a different way, give feedback to your AI to learn, right? And let the AI just entirely do this. And, we have examples where we have trained AIs that on certain lines and process types, they can do 100% of all reasons entirely self-labeled. And again, that's just like an example of like robotic arm, let it take over. Agentic AI, let it take over. I don't want to be in the loop. Finish the job for me.
I think it's important maybe here to say, why is it called agentic, right? And it goes back to how you create agency for yourself, right? And the way you create agency for yourself is you understand the things that are true about the world that you're operating in, and the things that you do that make things true. So the actions you take, right? The interventions that you operate in the world. And then you do what if, and those things are true. That's called counterfactual reasoning, right? And so those interventions all come together, and you build a hypothesis that if I do this, this will happen. And that's all aimed at shaping an outcome that we call creating agency for ourselves. And then we observe the evidence from our action, and we say to ourselves through the learning loop, right? Did my action have the effect I wanted it to have? And then we adjust our world model of how we thought the world worked relative to the intervention that we took. And that's called agency, right?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't shape an outcome, it is not an agent. It might be automation, doesn't mean it's not useful, but it is not an agent if it doesn't make a decision and shape an outcome, right? And so I think we do ourselves a disservice if we call things agents that aren't agents, right? That shape an outcome. And just because it's automated doesn't make it an agent. And Andrew, you gave the best description of what an agent is as a robotic arm for the mind, because what they do is manage complexity for us by reasoning. They're our own automated scientist in that way. So well done. That was a great description of how to think about it. They give you back the ability to think about why you want something instead of having to manage all the complexity to get what you want. Right.
Michael, I'd like to add to what Andrew said in that space, because I've got a real world example that came up recently that I think is germane to that. We had a client that went in and installed cameras to actually study the process. And so one of those processes is you have to have feedstock going into the CNC machines, right? And so you'll very quickly note that if that space is open, you do not have raw materials to be able to continue to process. That equals downtime. All of that gets recorded automatically, and you can start to measure and quantify what is the dollar value of the time lost because we weren't managing that transition, right? And so you can have people walking the shop floor, or the camera can say, I know where that box is supposed to have some raw materials, or the box of materials is down to its last 3 or 4 components. I'm going to send an order that's going to go to a tablet that sits on a fork truck, and that's going to get replenished in the lead time it takes by the time the last component is consumed, and that will operate in a semi-continuous type flow. And that works really, really well. The side benefit that they received from this is they went through and looked at the cleaning cycle for the CNC machine. And they realized that it takes X amount of time, and it's measured largely in seconds, not minutes, to be able to do the cleaning. And they said, we really don't look at things that take less than 2 minutes. We look at the 20 minutes of downtime waiting for materials, and an agent would really be helpful there. But we didn't realize, or didn't think about at least, quantifying that 2 minutes happens on every single component that we produce on that machine. And if we just install a little bit of automation, we can get an additional $200,000 of value out of that machine, simply because while that person is extracting the component from the CNC, the cleaning happens automatically. They turn around, reload, and that time is not lost at all. They lost the fact that happens tens of thousands of times per year, and that turns into very real money for them. And that's where not necessarily an agent on the raw material replenishment side, but it's an agent saying, hey, let me show you what you know, but you don't value yet. And that's a powerful tool.
I think that's
where did you put the agent in that one? I didn't quite get it.
Well, the agent was on replenishment of the raw materials, right? So I can see that something is going empty, and the agent is saying, I'm going to go coordinate with the fork truck driver to do the replenishment, right? So that was the very simple thing that starts to happen. It'll just manage that for you. You don't have to worry about it. Just keep working out of the bin, and I'll worry about getting the bin out and getting the raw materials replenished.
Did you actually put an agent that could make multiple choices, or that's a pure automation, like it's empty call, like make a database query? It's
the early phase of it is it's just empty. So we've got the opportunity to lose time. What we didn't get to is that you have a replenishment, a reorder point that could be calculated based on lead time to have it show up at exactly the right second, right? So there's an opportunity to get that even further.
Yeah, I'm being a little silly, but it's a big debate in the space. Because whenever people point out a use case that can be perfectly automated deterministically, you go like, why would you put a thinking generative AI that could make mistakes in the middle of that? And it's like, you would not want to. That would be silly. You should like integrate that, right?
Yeah.
And that is better. And like and that can be AI as well, because like you might be making a complex data science model with the camera to predict accurately if the material's not there, and then just order, right?
Yes,
and
correct.
Then there's this other set of things, which I don't want to lose sight of, because they both exist, which is there are a set of squishy problems in the factory where like there doesn't exist a pure automation for, but a generative AI will make mistakes, but it can also do it better than a human can. And that's like this different class of problems, right?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
So, like, both of these are creating value. And I think, folks that lead like digitization in a large manufacturer are thinking about how they make use of all these capabilities ultimately for OEE, yield, utilization, on-time delivery, right?
Yeah, the easy portion of that that's lost is the fact that these environments are exceptionally dynamic, right? My staffing levels change because people call off. I've got machines that are going on downtime. I've got raw materials that have variable lead times. I have any number of things that are happening. And while it's hard to imagine all those agents actually kind of working in harmony, that is eventually where this is going to get to, such that all of that heavy decision-making and observational energy that we put into things starts to get put into the background so that people can now start to focus on the things that humans are really good at, which is the creativity of saying, what's the next thing that we need to be able to figure out and apply agents to be able to go after.
So what do we think happens when all that dynamism creates this brutal math of folks having to make decisions that they don't have time to make in a staircase hierarchy, right, of an organization that says that the staircase can only support so many decisions. The further up you keep pushing these, what do we think happens in that world, right? You get a world full of rules. You get a world full of rules, right? So what happens when people get overburdened with math, right? And it's the math of having to make all these decisions from all this dynamism that's going on because of everything that Patrick just described. Now you got a company that's full of rules, right? Yeah. And it's because you don't have the structure to support it, because everything has to have a permission, and it's a permission architecture, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was going to be my next question. As we build out this with this technology, and as we think about what the organization and enabling these employees that have less tenure, right, and enabling them to be more effective where the work actually gets done, what's the organization look like, right? How's the organization function? Does it still look like an organization of stair-step hierarchy, where the permission, where the information goes up and the permission comes down, or does it radically alter?
It's going to be interesting to see, how the manufacturing and plant leadership will adapt to that. There are going to be now some engine that is making some of these decisions, and as Andrew's saying, some of them are not always right, but they're often better than what a person can make. But yeah, in the plant, sometimes you need very quick decisions. You need something taken care of very quickly, and you can't go all the way up and all the way down, right? You got to make a decision, and it's going to be interesting to see how some of these agents and other deterministic tools in the system will at least tell the frontline workers what to do or what to make a decision on. How that's going to be accepted and adopted. I was thinking before when Patrick, you were talking, I remember we talked like 5-6 years ago in Industry 4.0 Club. 5 years ago, we're not that old. 5 years ago in Industry 4.0 Club, introducing cameras in the factory, because there at that point it wasn't generative AI, it was more around security, right? That cameras actually, instead of having gates and whatever, they could determine when somebody was going into an area in the factory they were not supposed to be, and you could then have information. And there was just more and more cameras going in. But I also see with generative AI, more and more cameras going in, just because it can see things that and use the generative AI. You don't have to program as much. You can kind of guide it to, this is the area you're seeing. Tell me when something is different, or tell me when something's wrong, right? And so there are going to be more and more cameras in the factories, and just seeing how is that going to be adapted, because it's not really us watching the workers, right? It's really just enabling tools that improve the decision making and the alerting of if something needs to be taken care of, right? It's an interesting perspective that all this is now the things that I remember somebody was saying, 20 years ago, nobody would think about that they would go on an app on their phone, call up a private person in their car, and then get into their car to be driven from A to B, right? That would be just impossible to think about. And today that's natural, right? So the things are changing in this world every single day.
So let's try something controversial here, Andrew. I'm going to go to you first, right? So if we think about the current architecture of companies, right, you would say they operate as permission as a service architecture, right? That's what, right?
Yeah, I'll follow.
And what we're saying in this is that we got to close the skills gap before it closes your factory, right? It's a permission as a service architecture, right? And what would it look like in the future if you were to say you don't have an architecture's permission as a service? What would permission look like as an architecture if you were to say my factory is not going to close? What would that look like in the new world? How would you delineate the difference to say, hey, I got it right, so that the folks can say, I know today I have to go ask permission for everything. Tomorrow, what's that look like? Full use of what's capable with technology. And I'll add one last thing. All of us know that as technology becomes available, the only difference is not that it's available, it's that it's not evenly distributed. It's not evenly distributed because we don't make the decision to make it evenly distributed. We know what we're talking about is fully available. We just don't make it available, right? For lots of reasons.
So I think where I would go here is the pattern that's emerging in agents and generative AI is not that the people go away. It's that people become a manager of agents. It's like everybody has an assistant or you have a team of people, right? And so like if you're a marketing person, like agents can help you research and write papers super fast, and they can help you review the papers. If you're a coder, it can code for you, it can review your code. And so you need to become, even though you're an individual contributor, you need to become a manager of agents, and you're able to multiply your output, right? And so I see the same in the factory. And so if you're a maintenance person, you're a quality person, you're a line supervisor, you're the GM of the plant, what are the agents that are in service of you doing more? And then when you talk about permissions of like going up, just very strict, like each person's only able to do this, I don't see it entirely going away. You know, like there's going to be a hierarchy and like still roles, but I see individual people having far more ability under them and the agents under them taking a lot of decisions, doing the thinking by themselves, and them just needing to trust their agents, but them being able to need to see like, what do they do? So for example, let's say a quality person in the factory is responsible, and you know, you would have needed a team of 20 people before in order to see all the repairs that were going on, look at the defects that were happening, fill out CAPA reports, you know, corrective action, preventative actions, put things into the QMS, check with your PLM, your design system, make changes, communicate to the customer. Just a ton of work, right?
So much fun.
And a lot of fun, right? Yeah. So what I would see in the future is that there would be a quality person, which has like a team of agents with them. And for example, one agent, whenever a defect happens, goes and looks through the thread of information. It reads every log file, looks at the dashboards. It figures out, it decides for itself what the root cause of the defect was, and it writes a CAPA report by itself. And it puts the CAPA report into the QMS, and it comes back and it says, I did the whole root cause analysis. I believe I got it right, and it's in the QMS. And then that person needs to decide, am I going to check the agent's work just like you would an employee, or you go, am I going to trust them that they're good enough? And increasingly, just like you got to trust your employees, they're going to have to trust your agents too. And I'm not even going to begin with, they need to check it all. They need to check every piece. Today, you need to check every piece, right? But in a couple of years from now, you need to be able to check your new pieces, but depend on all the existing agents that they just keep working. And so if you extrapolate that, I think this is where you're going, Michael. I think again, it's like robot arms. Like we still use our arms for everything. We're going to use our brains for everything, but maybe one person's going to have 2x, 5x, 10x. That's the debate, whether this is a bubble or not. If it's 10x, it's not a bubble. If it's only 50% more, it's a bubble, right? But how much more is each person going to be able to do by trusting these agents and letting them just increasingly complete thinking tasks, like fill out a CAPA on a quality, like complete a downtime, like order new materials, like communicate to the customer when the order is going to be delivered, and just like let these agents do those things automatically. That's what I'd say.
Patrick.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, by the way. Root cause is one of my favorite things that I've done over the course of my life. So it's nice to see another aficionado talk about that space. I think the models should be driven in a way that are outcome driven, instead of being hierarchical and approval. I think that the hierarchical methodologies that we've used over the last however many decades, to me, quite frankly, is broken. And the primary example that I can think of that is the IT organizations acting on high and saying, here's what you will have or will not have from a software standpoint, and thou shalt and thou shalt not, when they don't live in the shoes of the people that could actually derive benefit from those things, whether it's from the ERP, the MES, the SCADA, or even the supporting software, much less the AI piece, which gives them fear and keeps them up late at night. And so I think what we have is the hierarchy is who determines what is the outcome that we are looking for. And then the agents go about saying, okay, how do I meet that outcome? So I'll try to make this as practical as possible. So in my time with the supply chain world, oftentimes we're looking to try to strike a balance between the investment dollars that sit in inventory and how much we can turn them without actually having shutdowns or actually incurring expedited freight costs, right? So that's kind of the arc that you have to be able to work to figure out what optimal is. And right before tax time, that outcome is changed. We say, okay, I want to start to drive down how much inventory I have in the shop floor right before I do my cycle count. And as soon as that cycle count is done and I pay my taxes on the inventory, I want to take it back up to a level where I can sustain the business and minimize the amount of downtime that churn actually causes. So you end up with, for the larger organizations, maybe not the small ones, you end up with teams of people that are trying to micromanage that in just the most ridiculous of fashion and causing chaos everywhere, where agents could step in and say, fine, I understand the outcome on this day is here, the outcome on this day is going to be down here, and I'll help you manage that as effectively as it can be given the data that you're actually providing to the system. And I think that's just one example from that space. I think the same thing applies over in the root cause world. When you're doing all that corrective action, it may be that I just need to get answers that are approximate and very, very quick to be able to remedy something so I can put in short-term countermeasures, or the outcome may be I need to focus on long-term preventative measures to ensure that doesn't happen again because it's so darned expensive. But I reserve the right to be able to say I want to be able to vacillate between the value of those two at any point in time just to serve the business. And so I think that's going to be the change. And as a result of that, things are going to start to flatten out significantly.
So, Yen, we're going to close the skills gap. And if we're going to close that skills gap of frontline employees, are we skating to where the puck was or to where it needs to be? And how do we know what skills we need in this landscape we're just describing? Because when I hear Andrew talk, it doesn't sound anything like the skills that we currently value today. And how do we know we get these right? Because I just heard Patrick say they're different also. And how many organizations are out preparing themselves for a skill that is where the puck's going to be, not where it is today?
Yeah, I think one thing that the advantage of what's going on right now is that some of us at the Gen X are here. We don't like change, but the millennials and Gen Z are much more used to that, and it's been happening to them almost since they was born, right? I mean, if we think about how they progressed with technology from when they were born until today, is so much different than ours, right? And so I think that's an advantage that you have, that you've got young people that are used to things changing over and over again. But again, you got to keep some consistency in the factory to actually, because you still got to report up, and system can't change that fast. But I think the change we've been talking about here with Gen AI, it's gonna have an effect on manufacturing. And I was talking before when Patrick, you were talking about the changes that's happening right now with the decision making stuff. I see, not from the manufacturing plant, but now in the leadership area and in the corporate world, right? Even Gen AI is still something that's very highly controlled from IT, right? How much you're gonna get and how closely, how much is potentially going outside the walls of the factory or the company, etc. That hasn't even gone down to manufacturing yet as much, right? That's even more restricted of what kind of tool sets. It's not like you can just, open ChatGPT and play around a little bit with it, right? It's not even open to the factory workers. So there has to come a change where the tools are available, they're controlled, they're restricted to where data is flowing, etc. And that's slowly happening right now. And once that really is pervasive, then you'll see those tools also be available to the frontline workers, so that they can start. There's nothing as fun for a frontline worker if they can experiment with something. They're allowed to try something out and see that they can actually improve what they're doing. They can improve outcomes, etc. Right? And these tools are right now very restrictive and not easy to get access to in a plant floor. And that's, I think, is slowly happening. And that's gonna take us to where the puck needs to be, as opposed to where it is today.
All right, so I'm going to flip back to Patrick here for a minute, because you brought it up, right? And so if you're an ops person, right, and I want you to take both sides of this real quick. We got roughly 8 minutes, and then I'm going to flip back to Andrew to close this out, right? And if you're an ops person and you're an IT person, what do you tell what's the ops person tell the IT person that the IT people need to enable them to go do? And how's the IT people respond to that? Because today the IT people have a different perspective.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that question in maybe a little bit of a roundabout fashion. So I think that the solution to that challenge actually resides in the layer that sits above them. So maybe at the COO level or the CIT level or something. And what they need to really think about, and I've done this in the past very, very successfully, put together a team, cross-functional team, where every single batch has the same value on it, and talk about it end to end. And I am describing all the way down to the shop floor level, put together teams of people to say, let me understand clearly exactly what it is that you do. Let me introduce you to tools that may be of value to you. Let you evaluate them, give me feedback, talk about what works and what doesn't work. And let me help you by, instead of saying thou shalt not, let's just talk about, here's how I can help you and empower you to be able to be successful in that which you are, you choose to do as your profession. That's where success is going to start to happen. And in that, start to tear the walls of the silos down and start to flatten it out into cross-functional teams that have commonized goals for success that are measurable and people can be held accountable to them. And in that, one last little piece, we have to be resilient. We have to be willing to say, I am okay with failure. As long as I have failure, I understand what happened and went wrong, and I'm willing to take 2 steps forward to fix the part that didn't work so I can salvage what actually did.
And so by failure, I assume you mean learning, right? That the only way I know I've learned something is when I'm wrong, right? And because we're all trying to get to a better question, right? And the only way to do that is to run experiments and understand what it means for us.
Yep.
And so Andrew, if you were going to give folks guidance, and we all want to act like we know what we're doing, the truth is none of us have been down this path before, right? And so what's the mental model for navigating something where you only know north, right? You don't have a map, but you have a compass, right? And that's all we have is a compass, right? And we have some insights, right? But we don't understand the landscape that's between the North Pole and us. So how do you go be successful on it?
That's a hard question, but I'm gonna take my best at it, because you said we only know north. That is, we need to skill our factory. We need to enhance their expertise to make it excellent before it closes our factory. I'm gonna start with Patrick's answer. I thought was excellent, and then maybe people, process, product. Like, you have to think about value in your business and connect the specific ways to move to that value. So Patrick, I like what you said. You said, not just ITOT, you said COO, like a leader needs to come down and say, we're doing this. I believe a lot in that as well. Like the COO, the overall operational leader, says, this is paramount, and the way we're going to do it is listen to our people. And then they get ITOT at the table together. And then when they ask those people, I think they should ask them about process and product. Like, how do we build stuff and what do we build? So like, I don't know, maybe your factory does, injection molding, or maybe it does pharmaceuticals, or maybe it does semiconductor or whatever. And what are you building? You're building photonics for data centers. You're building plastics for medical devices, like whatever. Where is the value in your business, and where is the pain in your processes? And the thing is, people don't know today because generative AI is so new. So like there's a lot of pain that is perfectly well solved by the older technologies. And that's not a bad thing. It's still really important and good to focus on those too. But I do think it's also important to force the team to have that conversation of like, what does generative AI do? And then they go, oh, it can think for you. And then you get that brainstorm going of like, I wasn't even thinking that way, but you're right. There's so many, I'm using my quality example again. There's so many kappas that we never write because we run out of time, and we have poor quality because of that. There's so many downtimes we never got to root cause, right? There's so many better projections of delivery that, you know, if we just had more people, we would have made. And so my guidance, I guess, Michael, would be, if you say, what if we had unlimited experts in this factory? What would they do? And that's the brainstorming prompt. And like, what would they do? Maybe in this factory, they would start writing a bunch more kappas because quality. In this factory, no, they wouldn't waste their time writing a bunch of kappas. They do this or that. What would you do if you had a bunch of experts? And that becomes the fuel to say, is generative AI ready to do that? If it is, you've connected the dots, and now you can put your OT people with a real use case and your technology people together. As you said, you can pick vendors and you can go.
Well, I think that line is probably the best line to close with I have ever heard, right? What would you do if you had an unlimited amount of experts in your facility and people to make use of those experts? Andrew, you closed it like a pro. Thank you very much. And Yin and Patrick, you guys are awesome. You made this job so easy, unbelievable. What a great group of guys. And thank you very, very much.